Hello, I'm Rosemary Hannah. Welcome to the series, The Bahamas Then and Now, that deals with our history, heritage, arts and culture, and all those things that make us uniquely Bahamian. Stay tuned, we'll be right back. Our guest today is Philip Burrows. Welcome to the show, Philip.
Thank you.
Philip is an actor, director, and co-founder, along with his wife Nicolette, of Shakespeare in Paradise. Philip, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, and how you became involved in the arts.
Well, I grew up on Bay Street. My first 7 years I lived on Bay Street, right across from, back then it used to be called the Crown Lands Office, Lands and Surveys. So that was a very fun time. We rented from the Gomez family who ran the Nassau Tile Factory. So we had a 3-story house with a beautiful porch that overlooked Bay Street. And I think back to, or I think when people talk these days about the flooding and how it's so bad now, I just remember how it was then. I used to stand up on the porch and watch the people in the dinghies float by when there was a really bad rain. So it's been that way for quite a long time. So yeah, the first 7 years I lived on Bay Street, and then for the rest up to this day I moved and have been in the same neighborhood from then until now.
Where did you go to school?
Where didn't I go to school? I went to 6 schools before I graduated high school.
Isn't that something?
That's I always say that my schooling was a convenience for my parents, and I'll tell you how that is, because when I lived on Bay Street, the first 2 schools I went to was Jack and Jill, which was right behind, which was on Dowsville Street. And when I graduated from Jack and Jill, I walked with a few of my friends from Jack and Jill to Kingsway Academy. Now Kingsway at that time was next to Bay Street Garage. So I remember myself and Noble Algreen and a few other people just walking up for our sort of graduation to Kingsway. So that was close by the home. My brother and sister went to Prince Will. So my parents said, well, if they're going to Prince Will and you got to drive to Blue Hill Road, you're going to Jordan Memorial. So I went to Jordan Memorial. Then my brother and sister transferred to Bahamas Baptist. Now, Bahamas Baptist, before it moved to Jean Street, was on Madeira Street. And so when they went there, I went to Easton Junior. So I was convenient again. I could walk there. And then Bahamas Baptist moved to Jean Street, and I went to Bahamas Baptist. When Bahamas Baptist announced it was closing down, my brother and sister were one of the second to the last class to graduate from there, because it was run by the American Baptist. I transferred to Aquinas College. So I graduated from Aquinas College, my 6th school.
Quite a transition, right?
Before getting
and
out of high
I think
school.
Aquinas College at the time, they probably had a very vibrant arts program.
Well,
too,
this was the reason I went to Aquinas College, because I was kind of recruited. Basil Christie was a guidance counselor. And Aquinas and Bahamas Baptist used to do these cultural exchanges. Aquinas came in and did a concert in our hall, and we went to Aquinas and we did a concert there. So when all the students were getting ready to decide where they were going to go, since Bahamas Baptist was closing down, a group of us, including Richard Pinder and Theodore Pierce and a bunch of us, we just moved to Aquinas.
Aquinas College.
Yeah.
So when did this desire for you to be an actor and a director, when did that first manifest itself in you? And what was the reaction when you decided that you were going to follow this as your profession?
Well, the first productions I kind of remember seeing took place at my church, Central Gospel Chapel. And there was a group of players called the Kingsway Players. Grace Kemp and her sister Ruth, that's who ran Jack and Jill and Kingsway Academy. There was a group that performed at the church. And I remember this production. I specifically remember Paul Cartwright as one of the performers. And after that, I was then asked to be in a play. And my first director that I could remember was my cousin Alan Lee, the pastor of the former pastor. And he was one of the early people that I remember directing me. And then when I went to Bahamas Baptist, I got involved in another production, the thing called Good News that we did at the church right next to the school. So it sort of gradually happened through school and church. And then, of course, when I went to Aquinas, it was full blown. It was. I remember us working on South Pacific. I remember doing the Music Man, the talent shows, and everything was very focused there. And then I think the first production I did with the NASA Amateur Operatic Society was Hello Dolly. And I think that was 74 or 75. And then I did Finian's Rainbow with them as well in 77. So it was always sort of there. I remember my father coming to me one night in the kitchen and saying, you know, what do you plan to do with your life? And I said, well, you know, right now, I think at that time I was working at Aquinas. I graduated from Aquinas and I went straight there to work as one of the bursars. And my father was planning to leave the business he was at. And he said he wanted to start a locksmith business. And he said, I tell you what, if you go off to school and you learn this thing and you start the business, once it's started, I will come and join, and later on the business will be able to pay for you to go to school. It didn't actually work out that way, but anyway, I did go off. I did the locksmithing course, and I opened Burrows Security. And a few months later, my father came and joined, and about 2 years into the business, I said, okay, it's time for me to go.
That's wonderful. So where did you study?
I studied at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. I really wasn't sure where I was going, what I was going to do. I was at a concert one night, and James Davis, who used to sing with me in both the chamber singers and the diocesan chorale, told me he was moving to Sault Ste. Marie and said, you know, what are you doing? And I said, I haven't worked it out yet. He said, you know, I have a application form for the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. Would you be interested in looking at it? I said, absolutely. Filled it out. They called me up to Palm Beach and I went, auditioned, and the next year I was at the American Academy. I spent 2 years there, came home I actually hadn't planned to come home. I was finished in New York. I was hanging around New York. I had no papers. I was just there. And Kayla Edwards had come to New York to audition for, I think it was a production of Porgy and Bess. And we met up she was staying at an apartment on Central Park West. And she said, I've just opened up this place called the Institute of the Arts. She said, why don't you come home and you can teach there, and Chamber Singers is having an anniversary concert and you could be a special guest and everything. So I came home, and unfortunately the teaching thing didn't pan out. And I walked into the Dundas one evening just to see what was going on. I had been on the stage at the Dundas, and I remember Gail Saunders meeting me as I walked in and, you know, kind of saying, who are you? And then she kind of remembered, and she said, you're Derek's brother, right? I said, yeah. So I went in and I sat down and I just went to watch what was going on. There was a rehearsal. Winston, who I hadn't known really well, outside of him chastising me for not being in this workshop that was supposed to take place, I told him I'd committed to Shirley Hall Bass to do something else, so I couldn't be in his workshop. He walked up to me with a notepad and a pen, and he said, take notes. Now, there are not very many directors that would do that. Directors are very territorial about what's going on, and he said, take notes. And it was a production of a play called The Gin Game with Patrick Ramming and Patricia Caldwell, and I took notes. And I got up and I gave the actors the notes, and I ended up working with the production until it closed. And on the closing night, Winston asked me what I was doing, and I said, well, you know, this thing fell through, and he said, I'm going to make a few phone calls. And the next day he called Mrs. Eneas, who was at St. Anne's, and he called Mrs. Marie, who was at Government High. And by that afternoon, I had 12 to 14 students in a workshop that I taught at the Dundas.
That's amazing.
That's
amazing. Yeah, that influence.
Exactly.
You know?
So that was very interesting, and that was sort of like where we started to talk about theater and how the contribution and everything. But at the end of that workshop, I got a phone call. Just before the end of the workshop, I got a phone call to go back to New York to do a play in an off-Broadway theater. And I left and I went. And I had a decision to make while I was there as to what was I going to do, hang around New York some more or whatever. But Winston had said, you know, we're starting this repertory season.
So anyway, tell us, we'll talk a little bit more about your sojourn abroad and what happened there and your decision to come back home, which I think was very fortunate for the Bahamas.
Well.
Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
You're watching the Bahamas Then and Now. This episode is brought to you by the Private Trust Corporation Limited, Dungalik Studios, and Easy Light Native Charcoal.
This is the Bahamas. 700 islands, reefs, and keys, sporting a distinct history and heritage all its own. This is New Providence, most populated, industrialized island at the center of the archipelago. Home of Nassau, the capital city, seat of parliament, location of political and social revolution, site from which our nation declared its independence. And this is Over the Hill, a community, a series of neighborhoods in what was then considered Southwest New Providence. Settled by slaves, having served as the midwife of national deliverance. Over the Hill, a breeding ground of nation builders, constructing trait by trait, precept upon precept, character-toting, culture-shaping leaders. Over the Hill, where independence was born, where the naval string of Bahamianization is buried, where Junkanoo got polished. Over the Hill, where sense and sensitivity were kneaded into the dough of children's souls, where people reverently genuflected to the image of God in every man. Over the Hill. East Street, Market Street, Blue Hill Road, Baintown, Grantstown, Anderson Street, Augusta Street, DeFort Hill, McPherson Street, Over the Hill, McCullough Corner, Hay Street, Glinton Square, where? Mason's Addition, Jail Alley, Lewis Street, Over the Hill. The Coakleys, the Smiths, the Johnsons, the Blydens, the DeStoops, the Grants and the Coopers, the McPhersons and the Pindlings, the Allens and the Winders. Over the Hill. The Hannahs, the Bostricks, the Burnsides, the Bethels, the Walkers, the Enuses, and the Thompsons, the McCartneys, and the Gibsons. Over the Hill. What if we went back and dug into the soil of our glorious past? And what if we studied the roots and found the patterns of Bahamian unity and success and progress, and superimpose those on the social ills of Lil Nassau, the social ills of the Bahamas in general? What would happen? What would happen if we really understood where we came from? Our heritage is not ghetto. Our language is not profanity. Our resolution is not violence. We are Bahamians, kings and queens, gentlemen and ladies, athletes and warriors in every sphere. Geniuses and priests, artists and leaders, and much of it started over the hill.
You're watching the Bahamas Then and Now.
Before the break, Philip, we were talking about your sojourn abroad and your training there and your decision to come back to the Bahamas. What motivated you to come back?
Well, when I was here and I did the workshops, and Winston had talked about the possibility of creating a repertory season. He was very interested in having the theater. The theater was closed more than it was open, and he was really interested in trying to see whether there was a way to pull the whole thing together. I went back and I trained as an actor, so I was ready to act. I didn't want to. I had no papers, so I couldn't do anything, and I was trying to work out ways to get my green card and all this kind of stuff. And then I said, I would prefer to be, I'll continue to work on that, but I prefer to be doing something than not. So I came back home in 1981. And immediately, the first major thing that happened was Clement Bethel had asked Winston to see if we could prepare something to go to Carafesta in Barbados. And my first two plays that I directed was Winston's play Them, and Susan Wallace's play Single Seven. And we did them as 2 one-acts that we took to Barbados. And when we came back from Barbados, the Dundas repertory season started that year. It was the first of, I think it ended up being 19 years of repertory season, 17 of which I was artistic director for.
Excellent years, yes.
And so we started that with 12 Angry Men, directed by John Amos, and Miss Ridden Drinks a Little, that I directed. And we just kept going for the next I kept going for the next 16 years until I left to teach in Canada.
I know, I saw them all. I saw all of the plays. Tell us about your involvement with Winston on, I think it was You Can Lead a Horse to Water, and also the Sammy Swain project. And you're working along with your father-in-law, Clement Bethel.
Clement, my friends were always older than me. So both Clement and Winston, I counted as friends. We would go to lunch a lot. We would go to Mondingo's late in the night after rehearsal and have Scotch conch. And so that was always fun. But it was 1982 or 3. We were having lunch at Three Queens. And we were talking about theater, and Winston had started and had written most of You Can Lead a Horse to Water. And we were discussing it over lunch, and we were talking about it. And Clement said, I want to do something different with Sammy Swain. Sammy Swain had always been a ballet. And we all discussed it, and the three of us, Winston and I, worked up to a certain point on You Can Lead a Horse to Water until we brought Cleophas in. And Cleophas came in because Cleophas was an associate at McKinney, Bancroft and Hughes, and we needed somebody to write, Winston had written these chants. We needed somebody to put them to the proper rhythms. And so he asked Cleophas, and the three of us really spent a lot of time working on You Can Lead a Horse to Water. Clement, Winston and I spent a lot of time on changing Sammy Swain from a ballet to a folk opera. And Winston, Cleophas and I then again did Our Boys.
I'm very happy to say that I was in both of those productions under your direction too.
And Our Boys was really weird because Our Boys came about because we were at a Christmas Eve party at Winston's house, and I think the Dundas had produced Cavalleria Rusticana, the opera, a year or that same year earlier. And we were just hanging out, the last people left at the party. And we sort of said, well, why don't we do our own opera? And that's really how it started.
Tell us, what is Our Boys based on?
Our Boys is based on The Sinking of the Flamingo. And we needed some major event. Opera's, you know, normally based on something and big, and we all thought that was a strong idea. And I said, well, I will go out and outline what the story is, you know, who the characters are, what the progression is going to be, whatever, and then we will start working on the libretto. And
Could explain to the listening audience what a libretto is.
it's actually the story, the actual words of what the people sing in the opera. And Cleophas was then to take that libretto and go off and take our words and make music from those words. And first grand opera in the English-speaking Caribbean.
Excellent. And first for the Bahamas,
Absolutely.
the Bahamas,
Yes,
very significant. Tell us now a little bit about your collaboration with your wife Nicolette and Shakespeare in Paradise, and how that all came about. You know, bringing back Sammy Swain for the season last year.
Well, Shakespeare in Paradise actually came about. Nicolette and I were both teaching at Lester B. Pearson College in Victoria, British Columbia, Canada. And I was brought in to teach theater arts. And during the first year there, the director of the school who hired me, Peter Bavington, he came up to me and he said, I think a good thing for your students to be exposed to would be the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. And at that time, I had not heard of the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. I couldn't sort of put Oregon and Shakespeare together. They didn't seem to fit for me. So I researched it, and Nico and I got 2 school buses and took my 14 students, 7 in her bus and 7 in mine, and we drove 14 hours from Victoria, BC to Ashland, Oregon. And we went to see in 6 plays in 3 days at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. Brilliant theater. I mean, better than some of the things I've seen on Broadway by far.
Yes.
And we looked at this place. Ashland, Oregon is a very small town. You know, I would say maybe from Dowswell Street to maybe the British Colonial.
Really?
It's like the whole town. And Nico said, if they could do this in this town, we could surely do this in the Bahamas. And so for 4 years running, we went to the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. And when we came home in 2000, we started to try to figure out what would happen with this. And it took a little while, but the idea of it really came from the Oregon Shakespeare Festival.
You know, a lot of people have the misconception that Junkanoo is the sum total of our culture. Speak to that for us, please. Well,
you know, that is always a contentious sort of thing, but you know, Junkanoo is an important part of the culture. Junkanoo incorporates theater, dance, and music. But I remember the late Rex Nettlefoot coming to the Dundas one night. I think we were probably in rehearsal for Sammy Swain. And he, Clement, Winston, and myself, we were standing around. And Rex said, you know, as it relates to dance in the Caribbean, Jamaica is at the top. And
he was right.
He was right.
Yes.
He had no qualms about it. He said Jamaica was at the top. And he said, you know, music, it's here and there. The Bahamas has some great, Jamaica has some great other Caribbean countries. He said, but I'm going to tell you, gentlemen, when it comes to drama, the Bahamas is at the top.
Isn't that wonderful?
That is what he said. And we have seen this in traveling. I will never forget when we went to Carafesta in Trinidad. And the people who came to us and said, the play was You Can Lead a Horse to Water, which is the probably most traveled piece of theater in the Bahamas.
Also did that to California, did you?
San Francisco, Trinidad, Edinburgh, Scotland. So it's been a very traveled, it's a brilliant play.
Yes, it certainly is.
You know, people ask me about the top plays that I've done and things like that, and I don't make the classification Bahamian or American or British or whatever.
Drama.
But Horse is up there as one of the top plays
anywhere.
No matter what culture it comes from. It is really an incredible piece of work.
Philip, tell us, what do you think we can do to encourage more of our people to appreciate the wonderful culture and heritage that we have here in the Bahamas?
Well, we have to stop hating ourselves. We have a real problem where we think that everything that comes from someplace else is so good, and we're not. And you know, I've the last 3 plays that I've worked on, it's been Sammy Swain, 12 Angry Men, and Sizwe Banzi is Dead. And people have come up almost in a state of shock at how brilliant they say these works are. Now, this has been, because theater has been on a downward swing for a little while, and we've done these kinds of productions
for years,
okay? But now new people being exposed to it, they're like, I didn't know it could be so good. I didn't know it was so, you know, and you know, when you see a post on Facebook where somebody says only in the Bahamas, it's always about something bad. And I go, have you ever lived in Canada or New York? They're great places to live, and I've lived in both of them, but don't say only in the Bahamas, because I've seen some really bad stuff happen in all of these places. So why do you just want to bring the Bahamas down? Why do you want to think that because it's Bahamian, it's of less of a quality? I think we have some of the most talented people in the world.
We certainly do.
In this country. Cleophas Adley, as a composer, can stand up to any composer. I think, you know, genius is tossed around, but I think he's so underrated to a lot of people because they don't really know. If you're a singer and you have to sing his music, you will understand exactly what you have to deal with. We have actors who are at the top of their game. I mean, we have actors who talk about other actors, like, you know, we did Sizwe Banzi, and I'm looking at Dion Johnson.
Dion, isn't he wonderful?
And Mark Humes working together. But Mark will sit there and go, I can't get up to the level of David Burrows, you know, and you do that.
Yes,
and then
dear brother David is a fantastic actor himself. Yes.
And then, you know, we have, I think, one of the most brilliant actresses around right now, Giovanna Hepburn.
Okay, yes,
I mean, she has been in all 6 of the Shakespeare shows that we've done.
Very good.
And it's put her and David together up against each other and Julius Caesar and just watch the fireworks take place. And these are local people who are not doing this as a profession, but they can match talent anywhere.
Yes.
Anywhere. I don't even go along with the singers. You know, one of my best friends in life is Joanne Callender.
Oh, yes.
Okay, and we've been friends since independence. We sang in the choir at independence in 1973. And you can't, you know, and then later on, Lee Callender, you know, I mean, because he came a little later when he came home from Barbados. Fred Ferguson, brilliant arranger, brilliant person to work with. Adrian Archer, you know, as far as a musical director or somebody to come in, there are people that I work with who, you know, any day of the week, I'm working on
Philip,
something.
There's so much more that we could talk about, but unfortunately, our time has run out. Thank you for watching The Bahamas Then and Now. We encourage you to continue watching and also to encourage others to do the same. Thank you for being with us, Philip.
You're welcome.